Hey everybody, my name is Matthew Mercer.
And I'm Spenser Starke.
And we are inviting you here to this video to learn how to play Daggerheart, a new RPG that is currently in development.
So before we get into the basics, we just want to remind all of you that this game is now currently in open beta. So things discussed in this video may change, shift, go away, be added to, and that's part of the process of making a game.
Indeed. To learn more and even join our open beta playtest, go check out daggerheart.com. So dive in, break the game, tell us what works, what doesn't work, what you love about it, what you hope to see added, and tell us all that through the official Daggerheart open beta surveys.
The more people who play the game, the better we can make it, so jump in and help us break this thing, because we are so excited to build this game with you and not just for you. So please play often and submit those surveys so we know what you like and what you don't.
Hell yeah.
So Daggerheart is a fantasy tabletop role-playing game that sort of blends the narrative and the crunchy together.
Yeah, I like that it helps facilitate gameplay that is both theater of mind, if that's your preference, but also easy enough to also play it more tactically and to use maps and minis like I love to do with our sessions.
The game doesn't really stop down when you're doing combat. You just kind of continue to play the way you do throughout the entire rest of the game. And so everything flows in and out of itself. So it allows you to really focus on the story that you all are telling. And
deeply customizable character creation and development process throughout the mechanics of the game.
It is a long-term campaign game, so it runs over the course of 10 levels, which gives you plenty of fodder to be able to play a year-long campaign with if that is something that you want, but could also jump in and play a one-shot or a couple of sessions, and works just as well for that.
Yeah, one of the things you can really expect from Daggerheart is a game that gives you tools if you want to use them to rapidly create in-depth characters that have dynamic relationships with the other players and characters at the table, as well as an opportunity and tools for the GM and the players to build a world together. You can make and play or run a game as deep or as shallow or as simple or as robust as you want to. And the intent of Daggerheart is to give you all those tools at your disposal and teach you how to implement them in your game so you can kind of pick and choose what it is you enjoy about this or run the full gamut and go all in. Now let's get into the basics of Daggerheart. Duality dice are sort of the bread and butter for Daggerheart. They consist of two different colored 12-sided die, your hope die and your fear die. Now you choose which is which, and for us, we're using this brighter colored one as our hope die and this kind of darker red colored one as our fear die.
Anytime your GM asks you to make an action roll, you'll roll both your hope die and your fear die, and you add them together along with any relevant modifiers represented by little tokens like this.
You know, the tokens can also be coins or beads, or you can just do the math in your head, but it helps to have these little representations right there next to the dice you rolled to do the quick math.
Then you tell the GM your result, along with whether your hope die or your fear die rolled highest. For example, let's say Travis is playing Bertrand Bell and is making an agility roll. He has a +1 to his agility trait, and he ends up rolling a 9 on his hope die and a 4 on his fear die, plus the 1. He'd add all that together and then tell the GM that he got a 14 with hope.
Yeah, now if a 14 meets or beats the difficulty decided by the GM, he succeeds on his agility roll, and he also gains 1 hope for rolling with hope.
Every time your hope die is higher, you gain a hope, which is a liquid resource your character can spend to aid allies or activate special abilities.
Now sometimes your character might have an experience that you could further modify an action roll in their favor. Like maybe your character has Haggler as an experience when trying to negotiate with a shopkeeper, or expert herbalist when looking for medicinal plants in the vicinity.
So you can spend a hope before the roll and describe how that experience helps you, and then add its value to your roll. You add it all up, and if it meets or beats the difficulty score, you succeed. But your hope and fear die influence what happens next.
Indeed, if you succeed with hope, you get what you want, and you gain 1 hope. You can spend that later on. But if you succeed and roll with fear, you get what you want, but it may come with a consequence or add a complication. Additionally, the GM takes a fear token, a liquid resource that the GM can use to affect the story both in and out of combat, but we'll cover that later.
If you fail with hope, you don't get what you want and will likely face consequences, but you still gain a hope. And if you fail with fear, you don't get what you want and you may suffer major consequences. Additionally, the GM takes a fear token.
Now lastly, if you roll doubles on the 2 dice, you get a critical success, which means you get exactly what you want, you gain a hope, you clear a stress, and possibly some other cool benefits alongside it. Well, now that we've explained the basics of the Duality dice, let's lightly skim the character creation process. For a deeper dive into character creation, check out our Daggerheart character creation video where I sit down with Travis Willingham and make Bertrand Bell which is linked here.
But for the purposes of this video, we'll give you a brief overview. Our character classes are Bard, Druid, Guardian, Ranger, Rogue, Seraph, Sorcerer, Warrior, and Wizard.
Indeed.
Every class has one or more class features, which are spells and abilities that are unique to each class. Like the Rogue, for example, has a thing called Cloak, which allows them to move into a space where no enemies can see them and be effectively invisible as long as they don't move or attack.
Each class also consists of the meeting of 2 domains, which are like symbolic themes. Through these 2 domains, you pick and choose what abilities you want for your character by taking domain cards at character creation and every time you level up.
These domains are Arcana, the domain of innate or instinctual magic; Blade, the domain of weapon mastery; Bone, the domain of swiftness and tactical mastery; Codex, the domain of intensive magical study; Grace, the domain of charisma and enchantment; Midnight, the domain of shadow and secrecy; Sage, the domain of the natural world; Splendor, the domain of life and death; and Valor, the domain of protection.
So, for example, the Bard calls upon the charm and magnetism of the Grace domain, along with the lore and magic of the Codex domain. And if you want to cast a spell from a domain card you have, typically you'll have a spellcast roll. This works just like an action roll, but uses your spellcast trait that you can find on your subclass foundation card.
In Daggerheart, your base character traits are Agility, for things like sprinting, leaping, and maneuvering; Strength, for things like lifting, smashing, or grappling; Finesse, which is used for like hiding, tinkering, or fine motor control; Instinct, which is for like navigating, perceiving, and sensing; Presence, for charming, deceiving, and performing; and Knowledge, for analyzing, recalling, or comprehending. You begin with a standard array of traits, which you can increase as you level.
Now let's talk about hit points and stress. In Daggerheart, a character's overall health is represented by a number of hit points, which you'll find on your character sheet in the form of several blank boxes. When you're faced with incoming damage, you will fill in or mark a certain number of these hit points based on your character's damage thresholds. So if you take minor damage, you mark 1 hit point. For major damage, you mark 2 hit points. And for severe damage, you mark 3 hit points.
Whenever you take damage, you simply compare that damage amount to your character's damage thresholds and mark your hit points accordingly. For example, if a rogue at level 1 has 15 damage coming at them, that would be just over their severe damage threshold. So they would mark 3 hit points.
If you ever take damage below your minor damage threshold, you take a stress instead of damage. Now, stress is also a resource that your character can endure to carry out certain uncanny feats or class abilities. But you gotta be careful. If you should ever need to mark a stress, but you can't because they're all marked, you mark a hit point instead.
Evasion represents your ability to avoid being hit by an attack. So when the GM makes an attack roll against a player, they roll 1d20. They add any modifiers and see if the result meets or beats this number. If the attack hits a player, the player can choose to mark armor slots to reduce the incoming damage by their armor score.
For example, let's go back to our level 1 rogue that has 15 damage coming at them. If they have an armor score of 3, like if they have leather armor, they could choose to mark one of their armor slots and reduce that damage to 12, downgrading that severe damage into just major damage. This means they mark 2 hit points instead of 3.
They can always choose to mark more than 1 armor slot if they need to reduce the damage by more as well. And you can, of course, get those armor slots back, but you have to do it by repairing your armor during downtime. We'll cover that in just a little bit.
Now let's go ahead and talk about Game Master stuff. So setting appropriate difficulty values for your players is a time-honored tradition for many Game Masters. And when it comes to Daggerheart, a general good rubric to follow when setting difficulty values is a range of 5 being very easy, like extremely easy, up to 15 being your standard average difficulty, all the way up to 30 and more being nearly impossible.
You should also be aware of the circumstances surrounding action rolls because they may grant advantage or disadvantage. For example, maybe you're attempting to lift a broken carriage out of a muddy ditch in the pouring rain. And if that's the case, the GM may impose disadvantage on the strength roll to do that. This situational modifier is represented by including 1d6 with the action roll. With advantage, you add the sum of the d6 to the roll. If you have disadvantage, you subtract the value from the roll instead. Always remember that at any time, a player can give another player advantage on an action roll by spending 1 hope and describing how they're aiding their ally.
Now let's talk a little bit about how combat works. Well, combat in Daggerheart is designed to be a free-flowing narrative experience with minimal stop-downs and a multitude of possibilities for theater of the mind and map-based conflict.
When you want to make an attack, you'll first ask the GM if it's in range of your weapon. So melee range means that you're within touching distance of the target. Very close is anywhere from like 5 to 10 feet away, or the shortest length of a game card when measured on a map. Close is between 10 and 30 feet, or about the length of a standard pen or pencil. Far is between 30 and 100 feet, or the length of a standard piece of paper. And very far is between 100 and 300 feet, or anything beyond the length of a piece of paper that's within the scene.
If it is in range, make an action roll and add any relevant modifiers. If the roll meets or beats that creature's individual difficulty score, it hits. Now simply roll your damage dice and add their values together.
Creatures also have minor, major, and severe damage thresholds, just like player characters, and a variable amount of hit points and stress, but they don't have armor or evasion scores like player characters.
Now for you GMs out there, if you're rolling to see if a creature hits a player character, you simply roll a d20, add the relevant modifiers from that monster's sheet, and see if it hits that player's evasion score. If it hits, roll for damage, and the player determines if they'll spend armor slots to reduce it or how many hit points they have to mark thereafter.
Now, if your players are entering into a combat that will last for more than 1 or 2 turns, your GM may place an action tracker on the table. When an action tracker is out, players add a token to it whenever they make an action roll. Players will continue to make action rolls in combat until they fail and/or roll with fear, which then allows the focus to shift to the GM to make what's called a GM move.
Now, a GM move is literally just the GM taking a turn. So after a player rolls with fear and/or fails an attack roll, the GM then has the opportunity to spend any number of action tokens from the tracker and activate that many enemy combatants. So all those turns the players took in succession now have turned into resources for me. After the GM turn is resolved, play then passes back to the players.
Anytime, GMs can also spend 2 action tokens to gain 1 fear token. Remember those? How every time your player characters roll with fear, the GM collects a fear token? Well, here's where they factor in. At any point during combat, a GM can spend 2 of the fear tokens accrued during a session to make a GM move without needing the players to roll a failure or with fear.
Additionally, GMs can spend fear tokens to activate special abilities of adversaries, or generate action tokens for themselves, or make particularly big and dramatic GM moves.
If things go really bad in or out of combat, character death in Daggerheart is a real possibility, but the system offers players 3 options to choose from when the character marks their final hit point.
The first option is called Blaze of Glory. This option lets your character, you guessed it, die in a glorious and heroic fashion, where they take one final action that will be an automatic critical success before passing into the great beyond.
Then there's the ever-popular Avoid Death and Face the Consequences, where your character drops unconscious and cannot take any actions until they get at least 1 hit point back. When this happens, you roll your fear die, and if it's equal to or under your level, you gain a scar, which means you permanently cross out one of your hope slots.
And finally, there's Risk It All, our personal favorite, I believe, which leaves it all up to chance. You roll your duality dice. If your hope die is higher, you stay on your feet and clear an amount of hit points and/or stress equal to the value you roll on your hope die. But if your fear die is higher, you immediately cross through the veil of death. Now, if the duality dice are tied, which once again is a critical success in Daggerheart, you don't just stay on your feet, you also clear all of your hit points and stress, renewed and ready to go right back into it.
Now that we've covered all the stuff you can do in combat, let's touch on some of the stuff you can do during your downtime. When you take a short rest in Daggerheart, you can spend about an hour doing 2 of the following options.
You can tend to your wounds or another player's wounds, clearing 1d4 hit points. You can blow off some steam and clear 1d4 of your stress. You can spend time mending your armor or another person's armor and clear 2 marked armor slots. Or you can simply spend the time preparing yourself for the path ahead and gain a hope.
If you're able to make camp and relax for a few hours, you can take a long rest and choose 2 of the following. Clear all marked hit points, clear all marked stress, fully mend your armor, clearing all marked armor slots, or do this on an ally. You can prepare and gain 1 hope, or you can choose to prepare with 1 or more members of your party and instead take 2 hope each. Lastly, you can work on a project. It takes a substantial amount of time, like deciphering an ancient codex or crafting a new weapon. The GM will assign this project a countdown, and each time you work on this project, you tick down that countdown until the project is complete.
Now, when you're at level 5 or above, during a long or short rest, you can swap domain cards in your loadout with any domain cards in your vault. This is useful because you can only have 5 domain cards in your loadout at a time, but you really don't have to worry about that until higher levels anyway. I think that's it.
I think that's all.
I think that wraps up our quick and dirty overview of the Daggerheart rule set as it currently sits. I know it's a lot up front, like any game system is, but we're excited for you guys to get an opportunity to dive in, play it out for yourself, and kind of give us your feedback on how you feel about it.
Yeah, we're really excited because the game is in a state where we can actually take the feedback that you're giving us and implement it across the game. We're opening the beta specifically so that we can work together with you on this. And I'm just really excited to see people like playing this game out in the wild after working on it for so long together here. So
if you want to learn more about this and even join the open beta playtest that we have now, please go check out daggerheart.com, sign up, check it out, print it out, play it with your friends, and help us make this with you. Not just for you, but with you. So thank you so much for joining us, and roll some dice and have fun.